When I was a teenager in 1997, I arrived in the United States as an exchange student at the Horace Mann School in New York. My headmaster, Dr. Lawrence Weiss, was a visionary. He believed China's future mattered, and that his students needed to hear a Chinese voice, not a translated one. I was eager to learn, eager to understand the America that had fascinated us back home. But I quickly learned something unexpected. To my classmates, I wasn't just a student, I was an exotic, dropped in from a distant, mysterious place. And they had questions. Endless questions. When will China become a democracy? Do you feel oppressed? One even asked with genuine curiosity, how do you wake up every morning knowing you can't vote for your president? I lived with a generous American host family who immersed me in democratic life, handing out flyers, attending fundraisers, meeting politically sophisticated people. And here's what surprised me most. They asked the same questions. It became clear, even educated Americans had a painfully simple picture of China. A land of repression, backwardness, stagnation. A country completely unlike the one I knew. The China I left behind was alive with debate and ambition. We argued about economic reforms, hosting the Olympics, joining the WTO. Our political science textbooks changed every year as Marxism evolved into socialism with Chinese characteristics. Every summer, Beijing's skyline transformed again before my eyes. Now fast forward nearly 30 years. That backward country is the world's second largest economy. And yet, people still ask the same questions. Why? Because for decades, the most popular book about China is always the one predicting its collapse. China is about to fail. China's model is broken. Implosion is inevitable. And yet it never happens. That's why today's question matters. Why is almost everything you know about China wrong? Backhand index pointing right before we go further, pause for a second. Does your view of China come from experience or headlines? Drop your honest answer in the comments. The truth is, we're using the wrong lens. We're trapped in binaries. Socialism versus capitalism, state versus market, autocracy versus democracy. When Western observers look at China, they see the Communist Party, state-owned enterprises, 5-year plans, and assume a Soviet-style command economy. But what if I told you the private sector produces over 60% of China's GDP, holds 70% of its wealth, and provides 80% of urban jobs? 30 years ago, it was the opposite. This is the China puzzle. So how does explosive entrepreneurship coexist with a powerful centralized party? Westerners call it impossible. Europeans call it a mystery. The truth? They're reading China in translation. The assumption is simple. China must eventually become like the West or collapse. But what if there's a third way? What if China built a hybrid system, not socialism, not capitalism, but a pragmatic playbook? Flawed, wasteful, contradictory, yet powerful enough to lift 800 million people out of poverty and compete at the technological frontier. This system isn't an ideology, it's a mechanism. And to understand it, you must throw away your old maps. Most people imagine China's economy as buttons being pushed in Beijing. That's wrong. The real engine is what I call the mayor economy. China combines political centralization with economic decentralization. Beijing sets the vision: become a tech power, cut pollution, achieve common prosperity. But execution is delegated to thousands of local officials, governors, party secretaries, mayors. Here's the genius: incentives. In the West, mayors worry about elections. In China, a mayor's promotion depends on performance, historically measured by one brutal metric: GDP growth. This is managed by the party's nomenclatura system, the largest HR department in history. It turned mayors into hyper-motivated CEOs, venture capitalists with political careers on the line. Take Hefei, a once obscure city. Instead of tax breaks, it invested $1 billion directly into a failing EV company called NIO. The city became its largest shareholder. NIO exploded. Hefei profited. An entire EV ecosystem was born. This is the mayor economy. If you're a state-owned enterprise, you live in paradise, easy credit, protection, monopolies. If you're a private entrepreneur, you're born into the jungle: red tape, high costs, endless approvals. And yet, the jungle won. Entrepreneurs out-innovated state giants by forming symbiotic, sometimes illicit, relationships with mayors who needed growth. In the 1980s, private firms wore red hats, disguising themselves as collectives just to survive. This is not chaos. It's controlled experimentation. And if this perspective shifted how you see China, this channel isn't about noise. It's about understanding the world before it understands itself. And tell me in the comments, is China collapsing? Or evolving into something the West still doesn't understand? The central government in Beijing sets the grand strategic direction. It defines the vision. China must become a technology powerhouse. China must reduce pollution. China must achieve common prosperity. But here's the part most people miss. Beijing does not micromanage the execution. Instead, it hands that responsibility to thousands of local officials, provincial governors, municipal party secretaries, and yes, city mayors. And this is where the genius of the system appears. In the West, a mayor worries about budgets and re-election. In China, a mayor's entire political future, his promotion, his survival inside the party, is tied directly to economic performance. That performance is managed through the Communist Party's nomenclatura system, essentially the largest HR department in human history. It appoints, evaluates, and promotes officials. For decades, one metric mattered more than all others: GDP growth. This created what economists call GDP worship. It transformed local officials into something very unusual: hyper-motivated CEOs. Venture capitalists with political careers on the line. They became, in effect, equity stakeholders in their own cities. This isn't a metaphor. When the local government of Hefei, a relatively unknown provincial capital, decided it wanted to become a high-tech hub, it didn't just offer tax breaks. It invested $1 billion directly into a failing electric vehicle startup called NIO, which was close to bankruptcy. The city became NIO's largest shareholder. Within a year, NIO's value exploded. Hefei made a massive profit. More importantly, it built an entire electric vehicle industrial ecosystem. This is the mayor economy. It creates two worlds. If you're a large state-owned enterprise, you live in paradise. Easy loans, state guarantees, monopolistic power in strategic sectors. But if you're a small private entrepreneur, you're born into the jungle. High entry barriers, expensive capital, a maze of red tape that can require hundreds of approvals. And yet, this is the miracle. The jungle won. Private entrepreneurs outcompeted, out-innovated, and outgrew their state-backed rivals. How? By forming an unlikely, and in the early years often illegal symbiotic relationship with those same mayors. The mayor needed GDP. The entrepreneur could deliver it. This led to uniquely Chinese solutions. In the 1980s, when private business was ideologically dangerous, entrepreneurs would place a red hat on their companies, registering private firms as collectives or township enterprises to appear state-owned. Local mayors looked the other way. Sometimes they actively helped. Why? Because that red hat company boosted GDP, and GDP meant promotion. This strange brew, this state-business nexus, is the core of China's playbook. It's not capitalism. It's not socialism. It's a hybrid system, and it worked. It built the economic giant now standing on the world stage. Does this sound like failure? Or something far more complex? Tell me what you think in the comments. So the mayor economy is the hardware. But hardware means nothing without software. And that software is the people. This is where another major misunderstanding begins. When you imagine Chinese people, you probably picture frugal, disciplined, conformist savers. A nation obsessed with saving money. That image is dangerously outdated. There are actually two Chinas living side by side, created by one radical policy. The one-child policy, introduced in the late 1970s. This was the most extreme act of social engineering in human history. And it didn't just change demographics. It rewired incentives, behavior, and family economics. Let's break down the puzzles it created. Puzzle 1. The savings addiction. Chinese households save over 30% of income. In the West, it's often below 10%. Many say it's culture, Confucian frugality. That explanation is shallow. The real reason is risk. For thousands of years, China's safety net wasn't the state. It was children. My father was one of 5 siblings. When my grandparents aged, those 5 children shared the burden: housing, money, daily care. But my father's generation had only one child. One child cannot replace 5. So my parents' generation did the only rational thing. They saved compulsively to build their own safety net. Puzzle 2: Marriage pressure. The one-child policy combined with son preference created a severe gender imbalance. Millions of women are missing. This turned marriage into brutal competition. A man's eligibility became tied to property, savings, and status. As the saying goes, a single man seeking a wife must own a home and a car. Entire families saved aggressively, not for luxury but survival in the marriage market. Puzzle 3: The accidental golden age for women. In one-child families, daughters were raised like sons. For the first time in Chinese history, urban girls didn't compete with brothers for resources. Parents poured everything into their education. The results are staggering. Women went from 24% of college students in 1978 to over 50% by 2009. Female executives rise sharply with each generation. The one-child policy, despite its cruelty, did more to economically empower urban women than any other policy. And finally, the little emperors. This new generation grew up without siblings and without scarcity. They're confident, privileged, and most importantly, consumers. They turn Singles' Day into the world's largest shopping event. They borrow. They spend. They use apps that literally translate to just spend. So when analyzing China, you must ask, are you talking about the parent who saves out of fear? Or the child who spends with global confidence? These forces pull China in opposite directions. Which brings us to the final misunderstanding. Yes, China's system is full of financial landmines, bad stock markets, property bubbles, shadow banking, and yet no collapse. Why? Because China's system is a closed loop. State banks lend to state entities. The regulator is the state. When debt fails, loans are rolled over, not detonated. It's inefficient, wasteful, but incredibly resilient. China doesn't absorb crashes, prevents them. And now the old growth playbook is ending. The real challenge isn't growth anymore. It's inequality. That's why you saw the crackdown on tech billionaires. Not Maoism. Not collapse. A painful pivot toward common prosperity. China isn't following the old Western script. It's writing a new one right now. We don't chase headlines here. We decode systems. And ask yourself this. Is the world misreading China? Or reading the wrong manual entirely?